Hi, I'm Gavin,
And I'm Dave.
and you're on the fringe.
Come along with us for a ride on a podcast where we talk about an area or a thing going on in the world that needs more attention, just like you do. Let's go.
On the fringe. Here we go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to On the Fringe. So, today we are going to be talking about one of the militant groups in Syria. And the reason why I'm calling them a militant group and not a terrorist group is because the United States designated the East Turkestan Independence Movement as a terrorist group up until 2020. Since that point, they have not been designated as a terrorist group. So you're probably
Also known,
wondering,
also known as the Turkestan Islamic Party.
yes, the Turkestan Islamic Party. So you're probably wondering what Turkestan has to do with Syria and what is going on here. And we are going to go into a little bit of background about the Turkestan Islamic Party and why they are currently in Syria.
So, first off, I'll just start off by saying most people at this point in the podcast are probably going, where the hell is Turkestan? And Turkestan is another name, or East Turkestan is another name for what is currently an autonomous region in China. And it's called the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. It's, I believe, geographically the westernmost province in China. It is massive. If you look at it on a map, it is just absolutely huge. It's one of the least densely populated autonomous regions in China. And the indigenous population of this region are called the Uyghurs, who are basically the easternmost branch of the Turkic peoples in Central Asia. So you sort of have a band of Turkic settlement extending from the Balkans and Eastern Europe all the way to East Asia and China, and it sort of peters out around Xinjiang. The indigenous population are Sunni, predominantly Sunni Muslims, Turkic speaking, and they identify as Uyghurs. Now, Dave, do you just want to talk about the sort of state of Uyghur identity under the PRC?
Sure. So the identity of a Uyghur in China has been, I would say, under attack since the CCP took took largely took control of Xinjiang after the Chinese Civil War and after World War II.
Hmm.
And in the last 15 to 20 years, the Chinese Communist Party has pushed to eliminate a lot of the Uyghur identity within China. So the Uyghur people who are traditionally Muslim have their own religion, they have their own culture, they have their own food, they have their own way of life. And the Chinese government sees them as being threatening to the overall governance and structure of China run by the Communist Party. And this largely started after 2009. There was a quote terrorist attack in Urumqi where there was a bus turned over and a lot of the Uyghurs were basically protesting. There were conditions going on in Guangdong in the southeastern part of China in a factory where Uyghurs were not being treated well by the Han Chinese. There was a lot of blowback in the western part of China in Xinjiang, and basically, the Chinese government said, okay, we need to crack down on the
Hmm.
Uyghurs because the Uyghurs are destabilizing our country. So, in the last 5 years, China has largely made this province, Xinjiang, into a police and surveillance state. They've done a lot of testing of new technology, largely facial recognition technology and surveillance systems that have been rolled out across the rest of the country. but it's kind of a playground for the CCP to set up a police state and keep tabs on every single person and what they do in Xinjiang.
And
And
yeah, no, go
mhm,
ahead.
I was going to say that people who violate the laws of the CCP in Xinjiang have been put into work or labor camps. And there are all kinds of articles about this. BBC did something, uh, VOA has done pieces. Virtually every major news organization has talked about these labor camps with Uyghurs. And the US actually passed a law, I think it was in 2020, that
Hmm.
basically bans any sort of cotton or product from Xinjiang being used in supply chains going to the
Yeah,
United States.
because I think it's really important when we talk about Xinjiang not to beat around the bush. We're talking mass imprisonment. We're talking forced erasure of culture. We're talking people forced into labor camps. I would say on a scale that probably hasn't been seen since the Great Leap Forward.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just absolutely horrific, horrific stories coming out of Xinjiang. Now, this has caused many ripple effects. One of the main ones, and by the way, a lot of people consider this to functionally be a genocide, what's going on in Xinjiang. It's a very serious, very terrible situation. One of the effects has been to, I would say, uh, very rapidly radicalize large swathes of the Uyghur diaspora, and there is a Uyghur diaspora, um, to basically prefer some sort of armed response to what is going on in Xinjiang. Now, historically, there was an Islamic movement in Xinjiang, and that pretty much moved abroad by the late 90s, mostly by veterans of the Afghan campaign against the Soviets. So people who were pretty closely affiliated with the Taliban. Uh, this sort of solidified into a radical movement, mostly centered in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And when did they start calling themselves a TIP? They started emerging
I think it was the early 2000s. I could be
early
wrong.
2000s, largely over the early 2000s, and they really started organizing pretty strongly. By 2013, they did something interesting. So their main focus up until that point in time had really been on the Afghan conflict, and they were actually fighting against US forces at one point in time. They shifted focus uh, to a battleground front far removed from East Turkestan. They began shifting fighters to Syria, and they actually wound up shifting most of their military forces over there. Now, it's important to emphasize because the PRC spends a lot of time and effort trying to convince people that everyone in the independence movement involved in the independence movement for East Turkestan are radical Islamist terrorists. They are not. They're a very small faction, but they're the most militant faction. Um, those fighters began gravitating, particularly as repression in Xinjiang got worse. They began gravitating to Syria and they began joining other religious radical groups fighting the government in Syria. And they have continued to do that really up until the events of the past month, which overthrew the Assad regime in Syria. And it's worth
And
noting that at the moment, uh, the Turkestan Islamic Party has about 1,000-ish fighters in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, some of whom collaborate with the TTP or the Pakistani Taliban. Some collaborate with the Afghani Taliban, but they have 4,000 plus fighters currently in Syria, most of whom are closely affiliated with HTS, which is currently unofficially recognized to be the de facto government in Syria. So they are quite a pivotal force at the moment. Um, and do you just want to talk about the video that they produced a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, so they've basically produced a video where they're getting ready to go back and take back Xinjiang from the Chinese. And I mean, it's a typical, I guess, propaganda video made
Hmm.
by a military group or a military organization that shows them being well trained and well armed, and they're all marching in step, moving toward the goal of liberating Xinjiang from the Chinese Communist Party. And I mean, it's a few thousand people. I don't see this actually coming to fruition just because of the Chinese government's investment into surveillance and into creating a police state in Xinjiang.
Hmm.
But I could potentially see more terrorist attacks from these guys on Chinese infrastructure. And if you go
Eh,
back, I think it was in 2016, they
hmm.
bombed the Chinese embassy in Kyrgyzstan. And as
Hmm.
China has built its BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, around the world, and they've built up a lot of ports and airports, these guys could be a thorn in the side for the Chinese in terms of just, okay, we're going to go and capture a port or we're going to blow something up and we're going to make life as hard as we can for the CCP. And I think as long as they can have money coming in, and a lot of their money has come from and come through Turkey,
Hmm.
that these guys are probably going to be a pain for the Chinese government. And I mean, they're in some ways going to be useful to HTS as well, to where, okay, we have a sizable force and we have military experience of not only fighting Assad, but also being able to develop and carry out attacks against a major country
And
if they're able to
it's
be successful.
also very successfully. It's also worth noting that at the moment, uh, there is, again, unofficially, quite a lot of chatter that TIP militants are actively being integrated into what is going to be the Syrian army. So it looks like there's a deliberate strategy by the HDS to tie them into the incoming regime. But I have a feeling that you're absolutely right. They are going to be kept on as significant leverage. It's also worth noting that I think they view them as leverage in kind of a multidimensional way because right now it looks like they're not going to be as reliant on China for aid and development money in the same way that like the Taliban kind of are. So the
Mm-hmm.
Taliban in Afghanistan have actually cracked down on the TIP to an extent because they really are quite dependent on Chinese support for much of their plans for the country. They need that investment, they need that development from China. Syria is not in the same position. Currently, uh, there's been an influx of aid, mostly from the Gulf, but from other countries as well. It doesn't look like the HTS interim government is going to be in a position where the Chinese might start making demands. And they will keep these guys on. So if they need something from the Chinese government, they will be able to use this force as leverage. And
Mm-hmm.
I also agree with you. I don't think we'll see any significant attacks within Xinjiang. I'm not sure that's possible, really. I don't think at this point it's physically possible. However, do I think security at Chinese embassies is about to get ramped up? Oh, oh yeah. Uh, I have a feeling that diplomatic security is about to get very serious for a lot of embassies in a pretty broad swathe of the world. Again, the TIP, they're not rednecks with guns. They have not fallen off a turnip truck. They have been engaged in uh, international jihadi struggle for a very long time, and they have connections with Turkish nationalists. They have connections with sort of transnational jihadi organizations. They have definitely probably have access to some organized crime. They are going to be a threat. Now, are they going to invade Xinjiang? I think it's highly unlikely. Are they going to be a major factor going forward? I suspect so.
And I look at it too, where these guys do have experience in overthrowing Assad, where they were actually part of the
Hmm.
forces that went into Latakia and Tartus
They were
in
spearhead
Syria.
forces, yeah.
So these guys know what they're doing. And I look at this, I'm not pro CCP at all, but I'm looking at this from the Chinese perspective, and they're going, this is a huge red flag that we are going to have to contend with
Yeah.
over the next probably 3 to 5 years at the very least, and then moving forward, where how are we going to protect our investments in not only the Gulf, but in Central Asia? Because they're
Yeah.
building a brand new railway right now from China to Uzbekistan that's going to be going through most of Xinjiang, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. And it's part of their BRI. It's very important for the Chinese government to continue to build these huge infrastructure projects, not only for economic reasons, but for political reasons as well.
And
And
it's an obvious target.
it's a huge, huge target.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is definitely one where we're gonna have to wait and see because this is I have a feeling this is far from the last time we're gonna hear from the TIP. And I
Mm-hmm.
suspect the next time we do, it will be much more demonstrative.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'm with you.
Okay. On that
And
note, once
with
again,
that,
please like, please subscribe, please give us feedback, and thank you all for listening. This is On the Fringe.